The Middle East is once again on fire. Multiple wars, overlapping crises, and rival powers pulling the region in every direction. From Israel and Gaza to Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon, every battlefield is connected, every move a trigger for the next. The question is, are we witnessing isolated conflicts or a massive regional war unfolding right before our eyes? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we dive into one of the most urgent and dangerous issues in global politics, the convergence of multiple wars in the Middle East. What makes this moment so alarming is not simply that conflicts exist, because sadly they always have in this region, but that they are now happening simultaneously, overlapping, and feeding into one another like a chain reaction. The world has seen isolated wars in the Middle East before, whether it was the USE-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, the Arab Spring uprisings in 2011, or the repeated clashes between Israel and its neighbors. But right now, something more complex is happening. Each front of conflict is connected by alliances, rivalries, proxy battles, and shared grievances. Gaza cannot be separated from Lebanon. Yemen cannot be understood without Iran and Saudi Arabia. Syria cannot be untangled from Russia, Turkey, and the United States. These wars are no longer standalone flashpoints. They are part of a much larger picture. That larger picture is one of instability, escalation, and the very real possibility of a broader regional war that could drag in outside powers and reshape the balance of global security. In this video, we will break down how these wars overlap, what's driving them, and what the world needs to understand about the risks of convergence. Buckle up, because this journey will take us through Gaza, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, Iran, and beyond, exploring how each battlefield is part of one larger firestorm. To begin, we have to start with Gaza, the epicenter of one of the most visible and violent conflicts today. The war between Israel and Palestinian groups, particularly Hamas, has intensified over recent months, with casualties on both sides rising and destruction mounting. But Gaza is not just a local issue. It has become a symbol and a rallying point across the region. For Palestinians, it represents decades of resistance and suffering under occupation. For Israel, it is framed as a fight for survival against groups it labels as terrorists. For neighboring states and movements, Gaza has become a test of loyalty and ideology. Countries like Iran openly support Hamas and other Palestinian factions, not only with rhetoric, but also with financial and military aid. Hezbollah in Lebanon has openly tied its fate to what happens in Gaza, declaring that any Israeli action, there is also an attack on them. Meanwhile, Israel's Western allies, particularly the United States, provide unwavering political and military support. This makes Gaza a hub of international entanglement. Every rocket, every airstrike, and every speech reverberates across the Middle East and the globe. The danger lies in escalation. If the Gaza conflict spills further into Lebanon or sparks unrest in the West Bank, Jordan, or Egypt, the fire could spread uncontrollably. This is why analysts describe Gaza not as an isolated war, but as a spark that could ignite broader conflicts, connecting directly to other flashpoints in the Middle East. Closely tied to Gaza is Lebanon, particularly the role of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not just another armed group. It is one of the most powerful non-state actors in the world, backed heavily by Iran and deeply entrenched in Lebanese society. Its arsenal includes tens of thousands of rockets, advanced drones, and a disciplined military wing. When clashes erupt along the Israel-Lebanon border, they're not minor skirmishes, but potential precursors to a full-scale war. Hezbollah has repeatedly stated that it will not allow Israel to defeat Hamas in Gaza without consequence. This makes Lebanon a direct extension of the Gaza conflict. But Lebanon itself is fragile, suffering from economic collapse, political paralysis, and widespread poverty. Another war on Lebanese soil could push the country past the breaking point, causing massive displacement and humanitarian catastrophe. From Israel's perspective, Hezbollah is seen as an even bigger threat than Hamas because of its reach, training, and resources. Any escalation between the two sides could quickly draw in Iran, trigger Israeli strikes deeper into Lebanese territory, and destabilize the already fragile Lebanese state. Furthermore, this war front cannot be separated from Syria, where Hezbollah has a significant presence and where Israel has frequently carried out airstrikes against Iranian supply lines. In essence, the Gaza war, the Lebanon front, and the Syrian battlefield form one interconnected triangle of conflict. If one front explodes, the others are likely to follow, creating a cascading effect that the region may not be able to contain. Syria is another crucial piece of the puzzle. More than a decade after the civil war erupted, Syria remains fragmented, unstable, and highly militarized. Different factions control different territories. The Assad regime in Damascus, with support from Russia and Iran, Kurdish forces in the northeast backed by the United States, remnants of jihadist groups in Idlib, and Turkish-backed militias in the north. This patchwork of control has turned Syria into a battlefield for regional and global powers. Israel frequently conducts airstrikes in Syria targeting Iranian weapons transfers to Hezbollah, while Russia maintains military bases and air defense systems there. Turkey is deeply involved both to push back against Kurdish groups it considers terrorists and to expand its influence in northern Syria. Meanwhile, the Syrian people continue to suffer in one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. What makes Syria relevant to the broader regional picture is that it is not a frozen conflict. Rather, it remains an active chessboard where every move affects neighboring conflicts. Iran uses Syria as a corridor to arm Hezbollah. Israel sees Syria as a threat to its northern front. Turkey views Syria as a matter of national security. The United States, though less directly involved than before, still has troops on the ground. If conflict escalates in Gaza or Lebanon, Syria would almost inevitably become a staging ground for further confrontation, pulling in multiple powers. This is why analysts warn that Syria is not just a war-torn state, it is a fuse waiting to be lit. Shifting south, Yemen represents another dimension of the regional firestorm. The civil war in Yemen has raged since 2014, with the Houthi movement seizing the capital Sana'a and Saudi Arabia leading a coalition to restore the internationally recognized government. What began as a local struggle quickly morphed into a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with the Houthis receiving significant backing from Tehran. Over the years, the Houthis have demonstrated growing capabilities, launching missiles and drones deep into Saudi territory and even targeting the United Arab Emirates. Recently, they have also positioned themselves as part of the resistance axis, tying their actions to what happens in Gaza and Lebanon. This alignment transforms Yemen from a localized civil war into a conflict tied to the broader regional struggle. If Israel escalates against Iran-backed groups in Lebanon or Syria, the Houthis could retaliate by striking Israeli or Gulf targets, expanding the battlefield even further. The human toll in Yemen is staggering, with one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, marked by famine, disease, and mass displacement. Yet, despite periodic ceasefires, the conflict never truly ends. Each flare-up connects to larger rivalries. Yemen may seem geographically distant from Gaza or Lebanon, but in today's interconnected Middle East, it is part of the same war web. The Houthis' willingness to intervene on behalf of Palestinians or in response to Israeli actions makes Yemen not a separate issue, but an integral part of the regional firestorm engulfing the Middle East. Iran stands at the center of many of these overlapping wars. For decades, Iran has pursued a strategy of building influence through allies, proxies, and armed groups across the region. This axis of resistance includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, and various networks in Syria. For Iran, these groups serve as both ideological partners and strategic assets, providing leverage against its enemies, particularly Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States. Whenever tensions rise in one theater, Iran's allies in another can escalate to increase pressure. This is what makes the current convergence of wars so dangerous. Iran has the ability to link them together. Israeli actions in Gaza can trigger Hezbollah rockets in Lebanon. Strikes in Syria can prompt Houthi retaliation in the Red Sea. U.S. support for Israel can spark attacks on American bases in Iraq. Iran itself faces internal pressures from economic sanctions to domestic unrest, but it has consistently shown resilience in projecting power abroad. At the same time, Israel has openly declared that it will not allow Iran to become a nuclear power, and the shadow war between the two countries includes assassinations, cyber attacks, and sabotage. If any of the current conflicts escalate too far, it could push Israel and Iran into a direct confrontation with catastrophic consequences for the entire region. Iran's central role ensures that no conflict in the Middle East can truly be isolated from the others. Saudi Arabia plays a pivotal role in this interconnected crisis, though its position is more complicated. As the leading Arab power and home to Islam's holiest sites, Saudi Arabia has enormous influence. For years, it has been locked in rivalry with Iran, particularly over conflicts in Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon. However, recent diplomacy has shifted dynamics. In 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to restore diplomatic relations through Chinese mediation, raising hopes for de-escalation. Yet those hopes remain fragile. The Gaza war has placed Saudi Arabia in a delicate position. On one hand, it had been exploring normalization with Israel as part of a USI-backed regional deal. On the other hand, widespread Arab anger over the suffering of Palestinians has forced Riyadh to distance itself from Israel. This balancing act highlights Saudi Arabia's struggle to reconcile its strategic interests with its role as a leader in the Muslim world. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia's security remains tied to conflicts elsewhere. How the attacks from Yemen remain a constant threat despite efforts to negotiate peace. Its rivalry with Iran continues to shape regional calculations, and its relationship with the United States, while historically strong, is being tested by shifting priorities and global realignments. Saudi Arabia may not be directly fighting in Gaza, Syria, or Lebanon, but its choices, whether to escalate, mediate, or align with outside powers, will have profound consequences. The kingdom sits at the crossroads of the Middle East firestorm, with every move scrutinized by allies, rivals, and its own people. No discussion of the Middle East would be complete without considering the role of global powers, particularly the United States, Russia, and increasingly China. The U.S. has long been the dominant external actor in the region, with military bases, alliances, and deep ties to countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia. During conflicts, Washington is almost always drawn in, whether through military support, diplomatic mediation, or economic sanctions. In the current convergence of wars, U.S. forces have already come under attack from Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. At the same time, American naval forces patrol the Red Sea to counter Houthi threats to shipping. Russia, meanwhile, remains deeply entrenched in Syria, where it props up the Assad regime and uses the conflict as a platform to project power in the Middle East. Moscow's relationship with Iran also adds another layer of complexity. Then there is China, which traditionally stayed out of Middle Eastern conflicts, but is now increasingly active through diplomacy and economic investment. Beijing's role in brokering the Saudi-Iran rapprochement signaled a new era of Chinese influence in the region. Together, these global powers add yet another dimension to Middle Eastern conflicts, making them not only regional struggles, but also arenas of great power competition. If tensions escalate, the risk of miscalculation between these powers grows. This is not simply a Middle Eastern crisis. It is a global one, with potential ripple effects on energy markets, global trade, and international security that could affect every corner of the world. Another layer of complexity comes from the humanitarian crises that each of these conflicts produces. When we talk about wars converging, we are not only discussing geopolitics, but also millions of ordinary people caught in the crossfire. In Gaza, entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble, with civilians bearing the brunt of airstrikes and blockades. In Syria, millions remain displaced internally or as refugees abroad, creating long-term instability across neighboring countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. In Yemen, famine and disease have reached catastrophic levels, with children particularly affected. Lebanon's economic collapse has driven poverty rates sky high, while constant instability prevents recovery. Each of these crises overlaps with the others. Refugees move across borders, straining neighboring states. Humanitarian aid is often blocked or politicized, and extremist groups exploit suffering to recruit and expand. The convergence of wars, therefore, creates a convergence of humanitarian disasters, reinforcing cycles of instability. The tragedy is that civilians, who have the least power to influence these conflicts, suffer the most from them. International organizations attempt to intervene, but they face political roadblocks and resource shortages. Global attention shifts quickly, and crises in one country often overshadow those in another, even though they are interconnected. By understanding the human cost, we see that this is not just a geopolitical puzzle, it is a moral crisis for the international community. Without a broader push for humanitarian solutions, the Middle East risks becoming not only a battlefield, but also a region defined by perpetual human suffering. As we bring all these threads together, the picture is stark. Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and beyond, all are part of a web of conflict that cannot be separated. Each battlefield connects to the others through alliances, rivalries, and proxy struggles. What happens in one theater inevitably echoes in another. The Middle East today is not experiencing isolated wars, but a convergence of conflicts that could spiral into a regional war with global consequences. Energy markets, global trade routes, refugee flows, terrorism, and great power competition all hang in the balance. For policymakers, the challenge is immense: how to prevent escalation when every actor has conflicting goals and deep-seated grievances. For ordinary people, the hope is for peace, dignity, and stability in a region that has seen too much bloodshed. The convergence of wars in the Middle East is both a warning and a call to action. It reminds us that global security is fragile, that local wars can have international consequences, and that the suffering of millions cannot be ignored. If the world fails to act with wisdom and restraint, the firestorm could engulf not just the Middle East, but the broader international system. That is why understanding these interconnected conflicts is so critical. And it is why conversations like this matter, because awareness is the first step towards solutions. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more deep analysis of the world's most urgent issues.